Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to Simply the Best Metal Albums number 2. There was a previous episode. I'm going to leave a link in the description. You can check that out. But in the world of metal, there are simply some stellar, amazing albums out there. But the term metal itself can mean so many different things. Good thing we actually have genres to divide it up, delineate the musical styles. And so for this episode here, I'm going to be running through 5 albums that are simply the best in their respective metal genres. Before we get into that though, if you are new to my channel and haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you're gonna stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this was simply the best metal albums, number 2. All right, so now the first episode we covered traditional metal, new wave of British heavy metal, thrash metal, speed metal, and glam metal. Yes, glam metal is a category under metal. I know a lot of you guys had an issue with me putting that in there, but it is metal. All right, so we're gonna cover 5 more genres now in the world of metal. First one up, power metal. And that goes to Helloween, Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 2 from 1988. It is their 3rd studio album. Featured 2 producers for this, which I thought was interesting. Tommy Newton and Tommy Hansen. And they didn't actually produce at the same time. The sessions were set up 24 hours a day with each person taking a 12-hour shift. So one guy would start with this and the guys would be recording and they just came and went, I guess. But that was kind of interesting. So half the album produced by one person and half the album by another, but yet it sounds really, really good. This is the second album to feature vocalist Michael Kiske, and as Kai Hansen actually sang on the first album, so just a little bit of difference there. This is part 2 of the Keeper of the Seven Keys trilogy, and it was a real toss-up between part 1 and what I've ultimately gone with, which is part 2. I probably could have gone either way, but I feel like part 2 is just a bit more consistent in listening all the way throughout. Plus, it's got the title track that's on it, Keeper of the Seven Keys, at 13 minutes, 37 seconds. It's just an epic number on here. Then it's also got 3 really cool standout tracks, Eagle Fly Free, personal favorite of mine, Dr. Steen, and one of the best songs he ever wrote, I Want Out. The band is just simply on fire for this album here. Each song is a standout track, in my opinion. There's no bad songs on here. Features the band in all its glory, representing power metal to the best of its ability, which to me is heads and shoulders above all the others that are out there, which is why I'm going with this as my favorite power metal album within the genre of metal. Okay, next genre we're hitting on, neoclassical metal, and that goes to Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force Odyssey from 1988, his 4th studio album, highest charting one in the US. It features former Rainbow vocalist Joe Lynn Turner, which is one of the main reasons I've chosen to select this year. I'm just a big fan of Joe Lynn Turner, but I feel like he also helped elevate the group beyond the 2 previous albums, Marching Out in 85 and Trilogy in 86, both of which are absolutely stunning albums. Again, I probably could have selected either of those, but I am going with Odyssey for this here, which I feel just has a bit more radio-friendly songs on it. I think that helped reel in Yngwie Malmsteen a bit, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. It allowed each song to breathe a bit more and didn't really, cause the albums to feel cluttered. The songs to feel cluttered on here. So I feel like that was a really good thing and one of the delineations between this album, those 2 previous ones, but out of all 4, this one being the superior. Killer tracks on this. It's got the band name song Rising Force in here. And again, I always like albums that have that connection, that tie-in, as opposed to an album that doesn't have it when later that song turns up on another album. But Heaven Tonight, the main single off the album, absolute killer. Riot in the Dungeon is a rad song. Deja Vu, another killer one. Besides Joe Lynn Turner on this album, you've also got Jens Johansson on here on keyboards, who plays with Stratovarius, but also played with Rainbow. Anders Johansson, his brother, on drums, who played with Hammerfall, another killer power metal group. Bob Daisley on drums, who played with Ozzy. Bass, I should say. Bob Daisley on bass. Jeff Glixman was the engineer for this album, who produced or mixed and engineered albums for Black Sabbath, Gary Moore. I know him mostly from Kansas, but he's done a lot of different genres and fields. Just one heck of a lineup on this album, making it a stellar selection, in my opinion, for the neoclassical genre. All right, next genre, symphonic metal. I'm going a little bit different direction in this. There's a whole host of modern symphonic metal bands, as it is a really big movement now. But I'm going all the way back to one of the bands that started this. And it, for me, is Savatage. Streets, a rock opera from 1991. Sixth studio album. It was the last to feature original vocalist John Oliva as a full-time member. He would return and sing on a few tracks here and there, and ultimately made a full return on the album Poets and Madmen in 2001. So this one here being a concept album about the rise and fall of a rock star named D.T. Jesus. The album itself featured layered production, orchestration, choirs, classical elements, all the best elements that bring out what is symphonic metal, in my opinion, and again, one of the forerunners of it here. So the album itself, not overly successful at the time, was a forerunner to what would become Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which is essentially Savatage, just under a different name. John Oliva, frontman, has often said that when people say, what happened to Savatage? Why aren't they around anymore? He said, well, the band just evolved into Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which is huge out there today. So the album itself, not only paved the way for symphonic metal, but also for albums that tell deeper stories. And I think that is a key thing here. The album strikes the right balance between rock, metal, orchestration, progressiveness. The songs and their interludes on here build off each other, making for an album that really feels bigger than it is, just as that whole, and some really great songs on here. The title track, Streets, that opens the album, is a great way to kick things off. Personal favorite off the album, Tonight He Grins Again. And then he's got some amazing ballads on these albums. One of the greatest piano ballad writers, John Oliva, If I Go Away, Somewhere in Time, and Believe. Quite a few of their songs have turned up in the sets for Trans-Siberian Orchestra, helping to make more people aware of this great band, this album here, the killer music. But all in all, I'm choosing Savatage, Streets, as my selection for best symphonic metal album. All right, now moving into progressive metal. Tool, Enema, from 1996, second studio album, first to feature new bassist Justin Chancellor, who I think added a fresh shot to the band when he came in, and has become a key member ever since. I can't imagine the band without him today. The album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200 album chart and has ultimately gone on to sell 3 million copies in the US alone. And also of note, which I think is great when this happens for metal bands, but they won a Grammy for Best Metal Performance in 1998, a feat that I think Tool definitely deserved. But those aren't the reasons why I love this album so much. Just some cool facts, some trivia to give you guys on these things. The album itself is unlike anything that came out at that time. In fact, still few bands to this day sound anything like Tool. They do something that is really unique unique and different. The album features melodic sense to it, yet done with musical passages that are intricate and have very strong production behind it. So just a lot of really cool things melded into what makes the album sound the way that it does. Cool standout tracks on here. I mean, the whole album is standout, but we get Stink Fist, the first single that came off of it, H, Enema, the title track, and 46 and 2, another great song on here. So at 77 minutes long, this album here doesn't disappoint. There's no bad songs on here. Very, very little filler on this thing, making it my favorite progressive metal album. All right, and the last one we're going to touch on here, industrial metal, and that goes to Ministry, Psalm 69 from 1992, their 5th studio album. Interestingly, the original title of this was called The Tapes of Wrath, but they didn't go with that title in the end of the day. The band combines elements of rock, industrial, speed metal, electronica, rockabilly, just all melded up into this thing. It was a mishmash, but it all works so well. Preceded by first single, Jesus Built My Hot Rod, which features vocalist Gilby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers singing on it instead of Al Jurgensen, frontman of Ministry, which is kind of an odd thing at the time. The thing is, that came out 8 months before the album, mostly because the record label didn't think that that song was going to be a hit. They didn't know if they wanted to keep funding making the album. So they dropped it as a single. It exploded. It was this surprise hit. Lo and behold, the label funds the rest of the album, and we get such a great album out of it. Psalm 69 really defined the industrial metal movement, both a commercial and critical success when it came out. 2 additional singles were released from it at the time, NWO, which stood for New World Order, and Just One Fix, but the entire album is consistently strong all the way through. Personally, that lead single, Jesus Built My Hot Rod, I actually think is the weakest song on the album, but, you know, it was the one that got me into the band, so it did its job. I guess it was the gateway drug for Ministry, for me at least. But there you go. That is my selection for best industrial metal album. There you go. Simply the best metal albums in their respective genres. Remember, as I said, this was a part 2 video. So in part 1, we covered traditional metal, new wave of British heavy metal, thrash metal, speed metal, and yes, even glam metal. So I plan to do some more of these episodes. I've earmarked out a 3rd episode with 5 more different genres of metal. We'll be up to 15 at that point. If I can keep delineating and classifying different styles, we will do even more. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.